enjoy those one last moment. It's more of a religious and spiritual feeling here, but what glorious, glorious exalted language to describe this simple natural experience. And here's Plato. It's said of Plato that the whole of Western philosophy is just a footnote to Plato. And Plato describes this experience not just as an idea, but an experience in his writings. And he describes it in this way. He says, but when returning into herself, diving within, inward direction of awareness, when returning into herself, the soul passes into the other world, the region of purity and eternity and immortality and unchangeableness. And when she is by herself, in this state of the soul is called wisdom. The soul is in the very likeness of the divine. So this is the state of wisdom, simplest form of human awareness, just consciousness alone knowing itself. This is a figure from the 13th century France, a Christian religious figure, Marguerite Porete. I'm not so good with my French, but here's what she wrote about this very experience. She says, the soul is now nothing, seeing her nothingness by the divine light that is in her. And yet she knows everything, since the depth of her knowledge of her nothingness is such that it has no beginning and no end and cannot be measured. So when she says the soul is nothing, she doesn't mean that it's disappeared. It's just that she means that the familiar contents of the mind, thoughts and feelings and perceptions, they're gone. They've been transcended. All that remains is just divine light, pure consciousness, without beginning and without end. And that line goes back to what we've heard from Howard Thurman and Lao Tzu and others. It is an immeasurable depth, but without being able to plumb this depth, she finds herself in it, which is something no one can do who has not reached this stage. So you can't plumb the depth, but you can experience it. And here's Saint Teresa of Avila, one of the towering giants of the Christian tradition, not just a saint, but a doctor of the church. She describes her experience of transcending this way. Everything is stilled and the soul is left in a state of great quiet and deep satisfaction. There sometimes springs an interior peace and quietude which is full of happiness, for the soul is in such a state that it thinks that there's nothing that it lacks. So total fulfillment. And we're just coming up to a last few examples in modern times. Here's Henry David Thoreau, the great American author of Walden and his great journal. He has longer descriptions of the experience, but in his journal he writes, "We become like a still lake of purest crystal, and without an effort, our depths are revealed to ourselves." Such clarity. Here's Clare Boothe Luce, an American writer, author, politician. She was the first woman appointed to a major ambassadorship. In the 1950s, she was appointed ambassador to Italy. And she describes her experience this way: "Joy abounded in all of me, or rather, I abounded in joy. I seemed to have no nature, and yet my whole nature was adrift in this immense joy as a speck of dust is seen to dance in a great golden shaft of sunlight." And here's Arthur Koestler, Hungarian, later English, author of many nonfiction and fiction books. This is from a longer, beautiful description of transcending, but what he brings out here, he says, its primary mark, its primary characteristic is the sensation that this state is more real than any other one has experienced before. That for the first time, the veil has fallen and one is in touch with real reality, the hidden order of things. We could spend hours together just reading beautiful gems of human experience like these, where people are describing the experience in such similar terms, many of them talking about in the experience of transcending, just like Arthur Koestler here, Now I know in this experience that this is what's real. This is the real reality. And as exalted as some of that language may seem, it's really nothing other than just allowing the attention to settle inward. Simplest form of human awareness, just settling inward to that quiet state of human consciousness. And we want to say, make this point, that in the very deepest moments of transcending, let me just go back to that, in the very deepest moments of transcending, that whole apparatus that you see, thoughts emerging and activity at the surface of the mind, in the deepest moments of transcending, all of that is transcended. All of that vanishes, and all that remains is just pure consciousness, just pure awareness, just the self, just myself, aware of itself alone. Now, these kinds of experiences are not limited to the great geniuses of world history. They're not limited to founders of great spiritual traditions like Lao Tzu and the Buddha. They're not limited to great poets and theologians like Rumi or Howard Thurman. Ordinary people using a simple technique of transcending describe experiences that use almost the same kinds of language and imagery as these great figures throughout time and throughout history. And I'll read just a sample of a few of them here, just very simple. I have had the experience of transcending all activity and experiencing awareness as an unbounded unity. There is no longer any sense of me and not me, no longer any thought or feelings or even a body, just the self. And that is all there is, and that's all I am. During the practice of the transcendental meditation technique, I sometimes reach a state of complete silence, which has come about very innocently. The experience is one of evenness and expansion, of infinity, and I am that infinity. During the transcendental meditation technique, my mind settles down, thoughts become less, and then suddenly all thought activity ceases and I slip into an unbounded ocean of awareness, which is pure, quiet, unexcited, and infinitely extended beyond space and time. In this state, I am not aware of any thought or anything. I'm just aware of awareness, you could say, wide awake inside, but not thinking. Simultaneously, my body settles down, breathing becomes less, and I feel relaxed. When I sit to meditate and my awareness sinks into the transcendent, the concerns and worries that have been gripping my mind fall away and become supplanted with bliss, sometimes quiet, sometimes bubbly, and peace. The experience is very nourishing. The transcendent is a completeness. I like that line there. Concerns and worries that may have been gripping my mind fall away. Howard Thurman just had that phrase, world weariness is washed away. So this is clearly a universal experience. And through a simple technique today, thousands, tens of thousands of people have access to the same kind of experience that the great creative geniuses of the past have had. So again, when we look into the past, when we look into any religious tradition or philosophical tradition or a wisdom tradition, sometimes we have to peel back the layers of the onion, but in every case, we find what I call the summons to look within. And I want to give you some examples of that. This is from Taoism. Here's Lao Tzu again, the Tao Te Ching. He writes, one who knows others is intelligent, one who knows himself is enlightened. And the Buddha, be a lamp unto your own feet. Do not seek outside yourself. Here's the famous expression inscribed at the temple at Delphi, know thyself, at the headwaters of the Western philosophical tradition. Confucianism, what the superior man seeks is in himself. What the ordinary man seeks is in others. In Islam, the Prophet Muhammad, he who knows himself knows God. Shintoism, Japan, the human mind, partaking of divinity, is an abode of the deity, which is the spiritual essence. There exists no highest deity outside the human mind. In Judaism, the greatest wisdom is to know thyself. And in Christianity, behold, the kingdom of God is within you. Luke 17:21. Stoicism, the philosophy of the ancient Romans. This is the great Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Look within. Within is the fountain of good, and it will ever bubble up if you will ever dig. And Neoplatonism, represented prominently by the philosopher Plotinus in the early centuries AD. This region of truth is not to be investigated as a thing external to us. It is within us. And the Hermetic writings, a body of writings that emerged in Egypt over the course of several centuries in the first centuries AD. This is a great theme throughout those writings. Call yourself back then to yourself, O soul, and seek in yourself all that you ought to get knowledge of. All right, so that is really a tour of the core of the world's religious and spiritual and wisdom traditions. And from that tour, we can extract the main tenets of what's been called the perennial philosophy. That means, what are the core elements of all of the world's religious traditions? If we boil down the different religious, philosophical, and wisdom traditions to their core principles, what are they? And here's how I've extracted them. The first is the principle of underlying unity, that beneath the diversity of the universe, there lies a field of unities. It's sometimes termed the ground of being, sometimes called the divine ground. Many names for it in different traditions, all pointing to the same reality in which everything has its being and apart from which nothing could exist. A second principle is the principle of direct experience. In every tradition, we find the idea that human beings are capable of experiencing this underlying transcendental reality directly. And where is it most easily experienced? Deep within us. The third principle is the principle of personal transformation. And that emerges from the second principle. When we experience this divine ground, we reconnect with the underlying essence of life. We realize our true nature, the eternal self. We align with the self of the universe. And the fourth principle of the perennial philosophy, fulfilling the purpose of life, that the whole purpose of life is to be transformed by the direct experience of that underlying unity. So you can see that that last principle runs through those first three in reverse. The purpose of life is to be transformed through the direct experience of that underlying unity. This is the perennial philosophy. And also what I've just expressed to you are the main principles of Maharshi's teaching. These are the fundamental principles of Maharshi's science and technology of consciousness. And Maharshi himself would say from time to time, jokingly, there's nothing new under the sun. This is really the universal teaching. This is it. And it's not a teaching that's really based in some idea. The great religious leaders didn't come along with a new idea that they asked people to believe in. Fundamentally, they had a profound experience, and they were able somehow to share that experience with other people. So if this is the perennial philosophy, and if these are the core tenets of Maharshi's knowledge as well, then we might ask the question, well, what's new today then? And actually, Maharshi's a little modest when he says there's nothing new under the sun, because he really has brought forth some very new and important things. One is, obviously, we have a simple natural technique for transcending. That's the TM technique. With this technique, any person has access to that inner reality that's been described in every tradition. Every person has access to the kinds of experiences that great people through history have described. Another thing that's new, we might take it for granted, but we shouldn't, and that's we have an understanding of what happens when we transcend. That bubble diagram pictures it for us. We understand that mental activity settles down, settles inward. We experience pure consciousness, consciousness knowing itself, simplest form of human awareness. We understand now that this is a fourth major state of consciousness. We have scientific research today that wasn't available in the past. To put it another way, we have an objective picture of what happens when we transcend, and also the long-term benefits of regular transcending. And another new and very important thing, we have a model of higher human development. Transcendental consciousness is a fourth major state of consciousness, but that fourth state forms the gateway to three higher states of consciousness beyond that, which represent Maharshi's model of 7 states of consciousness. That's a whole world of beautiful knowledge and experience that could be a topic of a future presentation. And today we have technologies for accelerating our growth, and that's advanced techniques in the TM City program. And amazing as it might seem, today, something new, we have an understanding of collective consciousness. Collective consciousness is the summation of all of our individual consciousness put together, for better or worse, and how even a small percentage of people can uplift a whole society. That's called the Maharshi effect. And again, it just comes down to this simple practice, this simple experience. But there's something more than just transcendental consciousness, which I just alluded to, higher states of consciousness. And I want to take this last part this morning to show what happens. And I want to illustrate for you Maharshi's formula for the development of our total potential. So when we meditate, as we've seen, we dive into pure consciousness. And when we come out into activity, we bring some of that with us. It's like dipping a sponge in water, and when we bring it out of the water and the sponge comes with us. Or dipping a cloth into some dye, we bring it out, it absorbs all the dye it can, we bring it out into activity. Most of it fades in the sun, but not all of it. And then again, we dive into pure consciousness. We become completely absorbed in that. And we come out again into activity, meditate and act. This time a little bit more remains. So meditate and act, dive within, come out. And what happens over time is that experience of the transcendent, of the self, the simplest form of human awareness, that becomes a permanent reality. And again, all of that structure of inward and outward stroke, when the mind is fully awake, we have the experience of a fully awake conscious mind, awake from its surface to its depth. No more 5 or 10% only awake at the surface. We have to wait till thought matures to its surface level. We are using 100% of our full mental potential. And in this state, rather than waiting, we're able to pick up thoughts at their very source, where they're most powerful, most aligned with natural law. This is a fully awake mind. This is the way the human mind was designed to function. This is what Maharshi calls the natural state. This is the natural state, natural condition of human awareness. And when we pick up thoughts at that subtlest level, and when the mind is fully awake, our experience, instead of taking place up at that wavy, noisy, disjointed surface level of the mind, when the mind is fully awake, now our experience takes place from the innermost resources of the mind, from that field of pure awareness, simplest form of awareness, from silence. And that gives rise to a unique experience called witnessing. Now, this kind of witnessing, it's not the witnessing, we might say, I witnessed a fender bender, or I witnessed somebody fall down on the ice. Witnessing is very precisely defined here. And I want to give an example here. This is Ray Reinhardt. He's an American stage actor, movie actor. And here he's going to describe an experience that he has sometimes when he's on the stage. And it illustrates this experience of a fully awake mind, at least momentarily. Ray Reinhardt says, there are two stages to having the audience in your hand. The first one is the one where you bring them along, you make them laugh through sheer skill. They laughed at that, now watch me top it with this one. But there's a step beyond that, which I experienced, but only 2 or 3 times. It's the most, how can you use words like satisfying? It's more ultimate than the ultimate. I seemed to be part of a presence that stood behind myself and was able to observe, not with my eyes, but with my total being, myself and the audience. It was a wonderful thing of leaving not only the character, but also this person who calls himself Ray Reinhardt. In a way, I was no longer acting actively, although things were happening. My arms moved independently. There was no effort required. My body was loose and light. It was the closest I've ever come in a waking state to a mystical experience. So in the previous slide, he talked about leaving not only the character, but leaving the person he calls Ray Reinhardt. Boy, what does that mean? To somebody just reading that could sound weird. But with our understanding of transcending, and even better, with some experience of transcending, and with that picture of the bubble diagram, we can see that for these moments, at least on stage, somehow the mind became fully awake from the surface to the depth, and he was experiencing from that level of silence, the level that's no longer Ray Reinhardt, that is just unbounded awareness. Ray Reinhardt is more manifest than that, but his innermost self is just that pure silence. One more that I'll close with here. This is Billie Jean King. I love this experience. Billie Jean King was one of the great athletes of the 20th century. I think she won 24 major tournaments in tennis, singles and doubles, awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the highest honor that can be accorded to a civilian. And here I want to read to you a description of her best moments on the tennis court. And this is a little bit longer. I can't put all the text up on the screen, so just listen as I read and enjoy. She says, on my very best days, I have this fantastic, utterly unself-conscious feeling of invincibility. I don't worry about how I'm hitting the ball, and I hardly notice my opponent at all. It's like I'm out there by myself. I concentrate only on the ball in relationship to the face of my racket, which is a full-time job anyway, since no 2 balls ever come over the net the same way. I appreciate what my opponent is doing, but in a very detached, abstract way, like an observer in the next room. I see her moving to her left and right, but it's almost as though there weren't any real opponent, as though I didn't know and certainly didn't care whom I was playing against. When I'm in that state, I feel that tennis is an art form that's capable of moving both the players and the audience. When I'm performing at my absolute best, I think that some of the euphoria I feel must be transmitted to the audience. Okay, now I'm going to read another passage where she gets even more particular about her experience. Here we go. Here she talks about the perfect shot. She says, the perfect shot is another matter. They don't come along very often, but when they do, they're great. It gives me a marvelous feeling of almost perfect joy, especially if I can pull one off on the last shot of the match. I can almost feel it coming. It usually happens on one of those days when everything is just right, when the crowd is large and enthusiastic and my concentration is so perfect, it almost seems as though I'm able to transport myself beyond the turmoil on the court to some place of total peace and calm. I know where the ball is on every shot, and it always looks as big and well-defined as a basketball, just a huge thing that I couldn't miss if I wanted to. I've got perfect control of the match, my rhythm and movements are excellent, and everything's just in total balance. That perfect moment happens in all sports. It's a perfect combination of violent action taking place in an atmosphere of total tranquility. My heart pounds, my eyes get damp, and my ears feel like they're wiggling, but it's also just totally peaceful. And when it happens, I want to stop the match and grab the microphone and shout, that's what it's all about, because it is. It's not the big prize I'm going to win at the end of the match or anything else. It's just having done something that's totally pure and having experienced the perfect emotion. And I'm always sad that I can't communicate that feeling right at the moment it's happening. I can only hope that people realize what's going on. So if you were counting, she used the word perfect 7 times. So they say that you can't live perfection in life, but I think that Billie Jean King would beg to differ, at least during these moments. She gave us a pretty good sense of what perfection in relative life might feel like. I just want to highlight some of the phrases that she used that really make clear what it means, even in these few brief moments, to have that fully awake mind. Just picture that again, where the mind is awake from its surface to its depth, where not just awake at the surface, but awake all the way down deep, and now experience is taking place from that inner field of non-changing, unbounded peace and silence. She says, first of all, during these moments, she has a fantastic, utterly unself-conscious feeling of invincibility. So far from being, absorbed within and, not knowing what's going on, this is peak performance to the point where she just feels like, as she said it earlier, she couldn't miss the ball if she wanted to. She's going to win. It's all lining up. I appreciate what my opponent is doing, but in a very detached, abstract way, like an observer in the next room. Like an observer in the next room. You couldn't define the experience of witnessing in a more exact way than that. Where's the next room? It's not really a next room. It's just experience from that field of silence, which is outside the field of change. That's the thing about it. It's transcendental. You can't reach in and poke it and stir it. That field from which experience is taking place is unbounded, beyond space and time, beyond cause and effect. That's the next room. That's the deep self that Billie Jean King is talking about. And it gets better. She says, I'm able to transport myself beyond the turmoil on the court to some place of total peace and calm. That place deep within. It's a perfect combination of a violent action taking place in an atmosphere of total tranquility. So violent action on the outside, but it doesn't disturb for a second the total tranquility on the inside. Best of both worlds, 200% of life, 100% dynamism on the outside, 100% silence and fulfillment and peace on the inside. My heart pounds, my eyes get damp, and my ears feel like they're wiggling. So vivid, but it's also just totally peaceful. Wow, I just love that. I love that. So here we're describing at least a glimpse of a fifth state of consciousness that Maharishi calls cosmic consciousness. And with regular transcending, regular diving within and coming out, that state can become permanent. Maharishi describes it as a state of self-realization because we experience the self as an ongoing reality along with everything else, a state of freedom and liberation because the mind is fully awake, unbounded at all times, a state of 24-hour bliss, euphoria, as Billie Jean King described it, rapture, as somebody earlier in our presentation described it, 200% of life. Life supported by natural law, because now the mind is wide awake to that field of the unified field deep within, has access to the full potential of laws of nature that guide everything that we do in life. And this gives rise to the experience of witnessing. And again, a whole body of research on what happens with long-term practice of the transcendental meditation technique, huge swaths of research on the mind, increased intelligence and creativity and other values, better health for the body, reduced stress and anxiety, the slowing of aging, faster reaction time, balanced personality development. Here we have a picture of really the growth, even improved relationships, growth of full potential. Here's what the growth of human potential looks like normally for people. And this is how it's understood in modern psychology, that growth, momentous growth, really levels off around age 15, 16, or 17 in adolescence. Certainly we have more experience, we can learn more, we can gain more knowledge and skills, but actual growth in terms of depth of consciousness pretty much levels off then. And despite attempts at different universities to try to change that, nothing has changed it. And this is typical human development. Now we know that with regular practice of transcending, we have a way of unfreezing that full development at any age. Intelligence can begin growing at age 25 or 30 or whatever age. So I want to come full circle. Let's come back to Howard Thurman, our dear friend. Here's one of my favorite quotes from Howard Thurman. This is a call to action to us. He says, don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is more people who have come alive. And I think if we were to sit down and have a conversation with Howard Thurman, we'd get into a discussion about the topic that he described earlier. And really, as he emphasizes, the ultimate way to come alive is to reconnect with that deep silence that he described deep within. He says, there's something in every one of you that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. It's the only true guide you will ever have. And if you cannot hear it, you will all of your life spend your days on the ends of strings that someone else pulls. Here's Maharishi. The search for total knowledge starts from the self and finds fulfillment in coming back to the self, finding that everything is the expression of the self, everything is the expression of my own self. So, Thank you very much. And I would be happy to take any comments or questions or observations or experiences that anybody who is tuned in with us this morning may like to share with everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Pearson. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. First of all, I don't think we gave you a proper introduction, kind of started quickly. We've been listening to Dr. Craig Pearson, Vice President of Academic Affairs at Maharishi International University, who's been on the Zoom webinar from the beautiful campus of Maharishi International University in Fairfield, Iowa. Dr. Pearson is the author of this book, of more than this, several books, but this particular book, The Supreme Awakening, Experiences of Enlightenment Throughout Time and How You Can Cultivate Them. Dr. Pearson has spoken around the country on higher states of consciousness, higher states of human development. We've had several questions that have come in, Dr. Pearson. And first of all, what a brilliant, brilliant talk. And if anyone has other questions, please send them to questions@tm.org and we'll try to fit them in. We've been getting a lot of comments coming in through the chat sessions. People really enjoy this talk. I'll start with a couple of questions that have come in through the email. Did the people that you speak about have some kind of technique for having this experience, or did it come spontaneously? And if spontaneously, how is that possible? We're talking about a universal experience on different continents spanning thousands of years. How did all of these different people have the same experience?
That's a great question. Certainly some, probably many of the people, some at least that I have shared with you today, and many of the people that I've collected in my book have had some kind of technique. We can only imagine that these experiences, for example, Saint Teresa of Avila would come during prayer. Obviously, prayer for her involved more than just some outward prayer or verbal prayer. It led to some experience of deep inward silence. Some people like Lao Tzu, would be part of a meditative tradition, techniques of meditation, possibly even techniques that were similar in some ways to transcendental meditation. So certainly people had some kind of techniques. This kind of experience has been well known around the world over the centuries and over the millennia. And well known that it is, people have strived and tried to do so many different kinds of things to achieve this sort of experience, withdrawing from the world and living in solitude, like the Desert Fathers, for example, in the Christian tradition, stripping away everything outside to isolate just this one inner experience. Techniques of fasting and many, many different things to purify the physiology. So yes, all sorts of techniques. And also sometimes the experience can happen spontaneously. I'm sure that some of them, like the ones that we shared today that, were spontaneous. How could that be? Because the experience of transcending is natural. It may be rare because our attention is focused in an outward direction and we're so kind of busy, especially in the modern world. But given a chance, the mind wants to settle down. That's the field of greatest happiness. That's where the mind wants to go, given a chance. And all the transcendental meditation technique does really is give it a chance in an effortless way.
Wonderful answer. Thank you for that. Another question that has come in. I've been meditating for 45 years and I've had wonderful experiences through my TM practice, but I haven't had these experiences yet. How come?
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people who can relate to that one. And the answer is that that growth to enlightenment is really a matter, first of all, of expansion of consciousness, regular experience of the transcendent, but hand in hand with that, purifying stress from this physiology, integrating physiological functioning, purifying the nervous system and integrating mind and body. And we each have our own minds and our own bodies, our own structures of stress and purification, stress that needs to be released. So it's really an important question to bring this up. The reason that we haven't yet is we just have a little bit more to do with purification of stress in the physiology. One of the things that I personally take heart from is that at the end of this book, The Supreme Awakening, there's an interview with a person named Greg P., a beautiful interview where he describes how he meditated regularly for, I think, 35 or 40 years. As the questioner said, had really nice experiences in his life, enjoyed his practice. He knew from the first time he heard about transcendental meditation that this would be something that he would be doing regularly, never missing for the rest of his life. But throughout that period, it was just kind of a flat experience. And he thought, okay, it's fine. I'm enjoying the practice. I'm just going to keep going and whatever. And then one day he was meditating. It happens here in the Golden Dome. And he stood up to leave the dome after his meditation practice. And in the words in the interview, he says, "Pure consciousness followed me out." And what he meant by that was suddenly, from that moment forward, it was just pure consciousness all the time. That wide awake mind was just there, just like there it was. No previous flashy experiences, just that in just the simplest, most natural way. And as he says in the interview, I just have to say this. He said, I had to take this on a test drive. I wanted to see if this was going to stay with me. So he went down to Fairfield for coffee. He said if coffee was going to shake it, then I didn't want it. And it has never left him since. So that's one person's experience. So that kind of thing can happen. But Sam, I just want to add this. When we listen to these beautiful experiences, we're inspired by them, but it's really important to understand that those people's experiences are those people's experience. And my experience and your experience are my experience and your experience. Our personal experiences are our experience. And Maharishi emphasizes being innocent about our experience. In other words, we don't go looking, I meditated, am I having the experience that Howard Thurman described or Lao Tzu? Is that happening? No, we're just completely innocent. As Greg P. says, if you go looking for somebody else's experience, you might miss your own experience. So we're just innocent. We're inspired by other people's experience. We're innocent about our own. And the formula for development of our total potential and gaining the fifth state of consciousness and beyond is just what I showed. Meditate and act, and meditate and act, and take good care of yourself also in between.
And I think you'd also recommend to play tennis as well. Is that right, Dr.
Yeah,
Purcell?
personally, I love it. And tennis would be a good.
So I think what you're saying here is that from this meditative experience, one develops that silence. And since most of the people who are connected probably are practitioners of TM, they've had that experience. And then when they come out of the meditation, they bring some of that silence with them. In other words, there's like a spillover effect, that calmness, that silence, that collected experience. But then there comes a time where that silence is permanent and it's there
Right.
all the time. And that's the experience that you've been sharing. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And in the case of Greg P., suddenly it was there dramatically, but the experience can be gradual. And I think with many people, it's kind of like turning on the rheostat of a light. It's just kind of consciousness is there all the time inside of us. It's consciousness, Maharishi terms it the light of life. We all have access to it. It's because we have access to that we have experience at all. So as that rheostat becomes brighter, the light of life is just brighter. Our experience just becomes brighter. There may be some ups and downs, but over the long span, over the long haul, it just becomes brighter. And one other thing that goes hand in hand in that I should mention is that when we dive within during TM practice, research has found that the brain functioning shifts from a rather random and orderly style of functioning into a very synchronous, orderly, integrated style of functioning. And that shift when we meditate happens literally within the first 60 seconds of closing the eyes to begin TM. It's very dramatic. We don't feel it, but hooked up to an EEG machine, there it is. And so another thing that develops over time is that when we meditate, brain functioning becomes this beautiful, elegant, synchronous style. When we come out, we lose that for the most part. But dive within, come out, dive within, come out. Gradually, over time, just like we maintain more and more unbounded awareness, the brain maintains more and more of that integrated style of functioning, that elegant style of functioning, which is highly correlated with increased creativity, increased intelligence, increased field independence. So that's a sign of the physiology becoming gradually more cultivated, more integrated. And so gaining the fifth state of consciousness really is a matter of cultivating the physiology. And that takes time. So that's the path we're on.
One question that has come in, Dr. Pearson, is have scientists started to take a look at the experience of not just transcending, but this experience of enlightenment? Is there a neurophysiological indicators that people are growing towards this or have actually arrived at this state permanently?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that brings us to the intimate relationship of mind and body. You know, we see the key sign of that relationship is research finds that when the mind settles down during transcendental meditation practice, because of that intimate relationship between mind and body also settles down. And in that deep inward settle state, the body uses that opportunity to throw off stress and fatigue and to move into its more natural style of integrated functioning. So to me, the most dramatic sign of physiological change, of growing higher states of consciousness is the one I just mentioned, which is growth of integrated brain functioning. You know, if Billie Jean King or others were, could be somehow hooked up to an EEG machine during that marvelous experience of the zone on the tennis court, I am sure that you would find, much more integrated style of brain functioning. But there are subtler measures as well. Research finds that inner state of calm and quiet that we experience during meditation, that's able to be maintained so that even during dynamic activity, you don't have to be out on a tennis court. We just maintain that calm. And people might ask, well, wait, when I'm in the midst of activity, when I'm driving a car or playing tennis, do you want to be like calm like that? And the answer is yes, because as research shows, the calmer you are to begin with inside, the faster you can respond, the faster your reaction time is to respond to anything that comes up, but also the more quickly you settle back down into that field of calm and collectedness. So there's a beautiful vision right there. I'm calm. I can instantly react effectively when I need to, and I immediately come back to calm. So that's another sign. And then there are changes in blood chemistry and so on, stress chemicals in the blood and in the muscles and so on. Those change also with time, with regular practice. So the great sign is we just become healthier. The body functions the way it was designed to function, free of stress. That's normal functioning.
It's a beautiful vision of human potential. And even this concept that human potential is not frozen, it's very inspiring. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what your IQ is. It doesn't matter. You've been showing examples from people from so many different walks of life, different levels of education, no education, athletes, people who are scientists. And you seem to be coming up with this same, that there's something similar in all of these people that has completely developed. And it's the same thing in all people in the world. So it's this kind of universal ability to achieve higher levels of human potential. It's a wonderful vision.
Yeah, and the idea of this this idea, that arrow that I showed, that normally human development levels off, and now there's a way to increase it. You mean you can increase a person's IQ after age 16 when it's leveled off? You can increase creativity. You can increase field independence, which means the ability to see the big picture. To me, that is like a monumental scientific discovery. That should be in the headlines, I feel. And now more than ever, don't we need access to deeper levels of human potential when we look at the challenges that we face, with climate, for example, with with nature collapsing around us, with time running out, actually. Uh, we really need the ability collectively to tap into deeper levels of our creative intelligence, deeper levels of our potential, the resources that are already there. We just have to access them. It's a treasure within is my subtitle. That's what everybody, the great people throughout the ages have said, that the thing to be sought is within us. It's within us, within us. Go there, get it, bring it out. And that's what we need now more than ever. And fortunately, there's a way, a simple way, natural way.
Yes, you mentioned time running out, and that's what we have going on here right now.
All
So I
right.
wanted to make a couple of announcements. First of all, if you would like to see a replay of this, it will be posted on a website, TM Talks at tmtalks.org, tmtalks.org. And in about a week, it'll be posted in about a week, and we'll be moving all of these special Creating Coherence webinar series to a new URL, but you can see them there for now, tmtalks.org. I should also mention again that Dr. Pearson's book, The Supreme Awakening, is available on Amazon. And it's if you purchase it and you like it, please leave a post there about your experience with the book. And I also want to mention that tomorrow at 11 o'clock Central Time, our next speaker, Dr. Nancy Lonsdorf, will be giving a talk, Secrets of Emotional Balance, 10 Ways to Even Out Your Emotions in Uneven Times. I should also mention that tomorrow, and that's on this same Zoom room, and that's tomorrow at 11 Central. Tomorrow at 4 p.m. Central, we have a wonderful speaker, Dr. Rhoda Orm Johnson, who's going to be speaking on the flow of consciousness in literature. Dr. Orm Johnson is an expert, an MA and a PhD in comparative literature. She was the chair of Department of Literature and Languages for more than 20 years at Maharishi International University. And she'll be speaking about the experience of poetry and literature and how it creates transcending and a deeper appreciation of consciousness, language, and the world around us. So thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Pearson. It's been absolute delight, and we look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow for Dr. Nancy Lonsdorf's talk on 10 ways to even out your emotions in uneven times. Again, Dr. Pearson, thank you so much for your time. And to everyone else, thank you for joining us. See you tomorrow.